Alright. Well, welcome Jeremy. Jeremy's going to talk today about, I didn't actually print out the PowerPoint, but what does your house say? He is talking about the different styles, and then he's going to highlight our houses. Whoever submitted their different styles of houses, he's going to talk about that. So, welcome.
Thanks, Marin, and thanks everyone for coming. Second Architectural History Brown Bag. Decided to do something a little bit different. Instead of talk about a project that I've been working on, I wanted to get input from all of you of the houses that you guys live in so that I can kind of bring it home and talk about the different architectural styles that go with your house and the different architectural components and elaborations, so you guys can have a little bit of knowledge about what's cool about your house. And so before I get going, there's a couple things that I want to say. First off, I'm an architectural historian, but what that means first and foremost is I'm a historian. The process of my job is to conduct historical research. I put the house or the property in a historic context, and then I evaluate that house on its historical significance. Now, architecture is a component of that process, but it's not the overarching theme of what an architectural historian does. But for the sake of this brown bag, I decided to not focus on the history, and I decided to go into the architectural because it's more fun. It's more fun to talk about what's cool about your house in that way. The other thing that I wanted to mention was, as we get into particular house styles and people's house styles, I took the pictures that you guys gave me and tried to do the best I could, putting it into a particular architectural style and call out particular features. But I used the picture that I had without actually going to the building and focusing on different things and actually doing any historical research. So I put it into historic contexts and different styles based off of the pictures. So if you've heard something different about your house, that's perfectly normal. Most houses have a combination of different architectural features from different styles to build this one mutt of a house. So you're going to find some things different about your house than maybe what I call out. And also, before I get going, thanks to everyone who submitted a picture. I actually wasn't able to fit every single person's house into the brown bag. I actually got a lot of submissions. And
How many did you have?
I got more than 15, between 15 and 20.
Wow.
And I fit most of them in. If I excluded yours, please don't take offense. Every picture that I got was great. Every house that I talk about fits perfectly in the presentation. So I really just minimized it for sake of brevity. It was just getting really, really long. So because I have so many houses, I'm going to be going really quick through these. I should, as a presenter, spend more time, ask questions, and really involve the audience. But I'm going to be burning through these because I got to get through all of them. So thanks for submitting them. But let's get going. What does your house say? Let's hope it says something a little bit more classy than this. First, let's talk about parts of a house so that you can understand what features I'm talking about. There's a door. We see a window. We have a roof. Now, I know we have a lot of biologists in the group, so stop me from going too fast. Other parts that you see a chimney, rafters and beams. As I'm calling these features out, trying to realize that I'm calling them out because they contribute to the architectural styles of buildings. So some houses have rafters and beams that are decorative, others don't have rafters and beams, others have them that are more to support the house or the roof of the house. Every feature that I call out is just a basic component, but I don't talk about every feature on a house. It just takes forever. Shutters are a decorative feature. A porch, some houses have them, others don't. When I talk about the facade of the house, that's the face of the house. It's where the front door is. It's usually the part of the house that's seen from the street. And it's usually where most of the architectural elaborations are located on the house, because that's what everyone sees. When I talk about an elevation of the house, that's any wall surface of the house, or any side of the house. So a house has a north, a south, an east, and a west elevation, because that's all the sides of the house. It could also be the facade, but the facade is just the front, so the elevation could also be the front of the house. When I talk about the gabled end of a house, the gable is the triangular portion of the house. It's where the two roofs meet at the top. So when I say a house is front gabled, that means the front door, the main entrance, is underneath of that triangular gabled end. If it's a side gabled house, that means that the front door is underneath the sloped end of the house. The footprint is usually a significant component to a building. Different buildings have different types of footprints. That's just where the building is located. Sometimes they're rectangular. This house is a L-shaped footprint. The pitch refers to the steepness of the slope of the roof. So steep pitched roof, a pitch is just the steepness of the roof. Some are steep, some are low pitched. This one would be kind of a steep pitched roof. The sill is just the component that goes underneath the window. Sometimes they're elaborated with architectural components, sometimes they're not. A sash refers to the framework of the window. In really historic houses, they're wood framed and sometimes they're elaborated in different ways. More modern houses, they've got aluminum or vinyl framing, sash work. The lintel is, the top part of a door or a window. It's kind of the same as the sill, but it goes horizontally over the top of a door. And then the trim is usually an architectural feature that's meant for decoration, goes around doors and windows. But these aren't the only parts of a house. There's a lot more parts of a house. So let's go into a little bit more. Arches are architectural elements you see in houses all the time. That's what an arch is. A dormer is just a projection that comes out of the top of a roof line. A mullion is an architectural feature that's designed to be a division between windows, and the purpose is to add texture to the light as it enters the house. So there's multiple mullions in between these window panes so that as light comes in the house, it adds texture to it. So that's an architectural element that you see on a lot of houses. Balconies, somewhat familiar with balconies. A column is just a vertical, piece that sometimes they're just architectural in nature for elaborations. Sometimes they actually support components of a building. Balusters, there's a difference between a baluster or balustrade and a railing. A railing is more of a utility. You hold it all the way as you go by. It's to prevent things from falling off. Balusters are the same purpose, but they're decorative in nature. So balusters, often you find them with balconies or porches. A transom window, what a transom is above a door. A transom is a strip of, wall, or sometimes it's a strip of wood that separates the door and the window. Well, the window above it's called a transom window, and the purpose is to allow light into the house. So that's just another architectural element. A pilaster is almost the exact same as a column. It's a decorative element. Sometimes they're used to support the upper portion of a building, but they're built into the wall as opposed to separate from the wall like a column. A tower, that's where you keep princesses. Hipped, if a roof is hipped, that means that it has an additional part of the roof on the gabled end. So as a gable comes up to the top, the hip is another portion of the roof that comes on the front end of that gable. Some roofs are flared. That's an architectural element. And you also see other elaborations, like the one I pointed out here is a pinnacle or a finial. Those are just the little tips that you see on the top of the house. So that is supposed to just symbolize all the architectural elaborations that you'll find in other houses. There's tons. So I'm not going to go into those.
Which house is that from?
That's nobody's house. That's a drawing. So it's pretty cool, though. I like it. I was going to go into the history of house styles, but then I realized I was going to be here for 4 hours and you guys would be sleeping. So instead of going through all the different architectural styles in California, and I list a few in this slide, I thought I would point out a couple things for you guys to be aware of. The first thing is, I hear all the time that my house is a Victorian style house. Well, Victorian style isn't real. There's no such thing as a Victorian style. Victorian is an era of house styles. So it's actually specifically when Queen Victoria of England ruled, the house styles that were made during that time period are called Victorian era houses. So when you see an eclectic house, that's a period where there's multiple styles. In a romantic era, there's multiple styles in that one as well. The other thing, as we get to more modern and postmodern type houses that I wanted to mention, instead of going into the history of these styles, is the difference between housing types and housing styles. I also hear all the time that that my house is a bungalow style. Well, bungalows, no such thing as a bungalow style. Bungalows are literally single-story framed houses. That's all they mean. So it's usually small single-family homes. California bungalow is a style. Craftsman houses, craftsman bungalows is a style, but bungalow literally just means small single-frame house. So that's kind of the 2-second overview for the different styles. So now we're going to start to jump into the thick of it, and I thought I'd start with my house just to kind of break the ice. I'm just kidding. This is my house. My house, I thought that it would be kind of a unique one to start with because it doesn't actually have a particular architectural style. It is what you call a builder's home. It has architectural elements that it pulls from past styles, but the purpose of 1970s, 1980s, 1990s houses is to be built quickly, efficiently, and serve a function. And the function is to house a single family. And that's what my house is what you call a builder's house. But it does pull elements from other architectural styles. And in particular, it pulls elements of the ranch style. And so you see a rectangular footprint. That's a very ranch style element. Just a long footprint with a roof that goes, covers the entire portion of the house, usually pretty low pitched. You also see a recessed entry instead of having a porch on previous styles. That's an architectural decorative element, a porch. Recessed entries are usually just to function as an entry. My house is side gabled. Again, the main entrance is underneath the side of the house. It has exposed rafters, a couple exposed beams. These beams in particular are actually meant to function as opposed to some exposed rafters and beams in houses are decorative elements. Mine function just to support the roof of the house, part of the builder's home. And as you can see, I have no elaborations. There's no fancy features, no things to point out in particular. We've got that beautiful T111 siding that sucks up paint like nobody's business. And of course, I got dirty kids sitting in the front yard. That's my daughter on the left and my son on the right. But it really wraps up these houses are meant for families to function. So that's my house. As I go I'm about to start going into everyone else's house. And I decided to put it together in a chronological order. I did mine first to kind of break the ice. So I'm going to start going into it in a chronological order, but again, if I put yours out of order from what you're familiar with, that's okay. That's just what I noticed from the pictures that I had. So Wendy's house is first. Wendy's house is a folk Victorian. These houses were typically constructed between 1870 and 1910. And what's unique about Wendy's house is it pulls in elements of two particular architectural styles. The Queen Anne architectural style, which emphasizes multiple elaborations and a lot of decorative elements, with the folk style, which really focused on simple forms, really simple, straightforward, symmetrical building forms. So let's talk about the components.
Where's that at, Jeremy?
This is in Redlands, yeah.
Oh, Wendy Linnell. Okay.
Wendy, yeah.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm. So this is in the first couple elements I'm going to talk about are the Queen Anne portion of the house. We got really steeply pitched roofs, fish scale pattern shingles. Those are decorative elements for Queen Anne. We have the porches with spindlework detailing and columns with spindlework detailing. Basically, they took these columns and these balusters and they spun them to have this really decorative, feature to them. Those are all Queen Anne elements, along with decorative brackets. Again, part of the Queen Anne is to elaborate, show some style, make it interesting. But the folk style starts to come out when you see a really simple form. Queen Anne style houses are meant to have a gable up at the top, a balcony over here, a porch that comes out over here. They're really all over the place. Whereas this one has a really simple, straightforward form. That's a folk element. The other thing you see is a symmetrical facade. It's got the gable that covers the entire front portion of the house. The door's right in the middle. The porch is very straightforward and very symmetrical. So those are all the unique portions of Wendy's house. Thanks for submitting your pictures, and those are what I noticed. Another thing that I wanted to mention was most of these houses that we look at don't have attached garages. well, garages didn't exist because cars didn't necessarily exist in the 1870s, 1910s, at least to the extent that they are now. So when you start to look at, you're doing preliminary work, or part of my job is preliminary determination, how old this house is, the very first thing that I look for is, does it have a garage? How big is the garage? Because that gives me a date range, at least to start with, if I have no idea what the house is. So that's one thing. So the next house that I come to is Don. That's right, another Redlands house. This is Don's house. Before I start on his house, I'm going to talk about his house, along with the next three houses that we look at. All were developed during the arts and crafts movement in California. And what that is in the architectural side of it is a drawing away from an emphasis on major elaborations from the previous Victorian era houses, and a more focus on wood elements and design and function. So it shows a lot of the beams and the rafters and the components of the house that really are part of the building of the house, as opposed to these architectural elaborations. So Don's is an American Foursquare, and I know that because he said that to me when he sent it to me. So that helps right off the bat. But let me show you what I noticed. The American Foursquare house pulls in, again, just like the previous one, two architectural styles, elements from two specific styles. Those are the Prairie style and the Craftsman style. The Prairie style house, you can see the elements are, we got the pyramidal hipped roof. I say pyramidal because if the hipped roof continued all the way to the end, it would form a pyramid up at the top. It doesn't, but that's what would happen. There's an emphasis on long horizontal lines throughout the house, and you see rows of vertical windows, particularly in the second story. Prairie houses have second stories, and you'll see those rows of vertical windows. But it also has some Craftsman style elements. In the Craftsman style, you see a lot of covered porches and continuous square columns. So these are some elements that we see. But what really makes his unique is the element that unfortunately we can't see in the picture, and that is the 2.5 stories. It's the monitor dormer that goes right up at the top of the building. That's what makes it a Foursquare. If it didn't have that monitor dormer right in the center, right at the very top, it wouldn't be a Foursquare house.
What is that?
It's a dormer is a projection that comes out of the top of the roof, and a monitor means that it's hard to explain, but it's like an eyeball that kind of comes out and looks. But instead of being rounded, it's a square eyeball.
It's something that we can't see on
You
top
can't
of
see it, yeah, unfortunately. But I know it's there because Don says his is a Foursquare house, and so it's there. If he didn't say that, I would call this a Prairie style house, probably. So, thanks, Don. The next house is Steve's. This is a Craftsman bungalow. Thanks for sharing this one. This is a perfect example, I think, of a Craftsman-style bungalow house. It has all the typical elements you see, including exposed knee-brace bracket. Yeah, he just painted it.
I would have submitted a photo. You want to copy mine?
Yeah. So you see, again, I was talking about before in the arts and crafts movement, the focus on the wood elements. So you see exposed knee-brace brackets, square columns at the porch entryway. It's always a single story if it's a bungalow house. Small covered porches and some decorative paneling. A continued focus on the wood elements. There's also no attached garage. These Craftsman-style houses were constructed all the way up till the 30s. You still see elements of them in current construction, but the original houses were built up to the 30s, so there's really no attached garage. And then, if you look closer, you can see Steve in the picture. Yep, you're in there.
So,
yeah, you might not be able to see him real well there, but he's there. So let's move to the next one. This is Lourdes' house. Thank you. Also a Craftsman bungalow house, and it's another great example. You can see a couple of the same elements, like exposed beams. You see decorative paneling. It's a single-story house, so it's a bungalow. It's got no attached garage, and it's got that entry porch. But I really like Lourdes' house because it has a couple elements that are really unique to Craftsman houses. Even though it's clearly a Craftsman house based off of the elements, it has two things that I noticed. The first one are these rounded columns. Rounded columns are very classical style architecture. They're not craftsman style. Those are square columns for craftsmen. So if I was going through the process of evaluating your house, I would take note that these are rounded columns, and that's a unique feature. The other thing I noticed is it has a really symmetrical facade. It's got the patio porch and the front door right in the center, and the dew extends with the windows right on the sides. Craftsmen are designed to be asymmetrical. So for your house to be symmetrical is really unique. And I actually didn't originally call it a craftsman house because of those two things, but then you said it was built in 1921, and that ties it into that period. So those are just things that I noticed about it. So thank you. And it looks really cold.
Yeah, it was. It was no.
The next house that we have, this is Kat's parents' house, actually, and it's in Idaho.
I grew up in that house, actually.
Kat grew up, yeah. It's actually another really good example of a craftsman-style house, but it has some unique elements that I'm going to talk about. But first, we'll talk about the craftsman parts. It's got the low-pitched roof. It's got the exposed knee brace brackets. You're starting to see the trend in the same types of styles. It also has grouped windows, and it's got exposed rafters. But then it's got a couple vernacular elements. And what vernacular means is, in architecture, is a pulling of features that are local to the area, or common, or used in construction that are common or local. The first feature that we see is the lava rock. That's a vernacular element. And what's unique about this one is most stone elaborations on buildings are built into the face of the frame of the building. These actually appear to be part of the frame of the building, which is really unique.
They are.
Yeah.
Go all the way down into the basement.
So there you
they
go.
are the walls.
So that's a very vernacular element, to have the stones actually be the walls as opposed to just a facing on the walls. The other thing we see is the patterned shingles, wood shingles. Craftsman houses don't have these decorative elaborations like patterned shingles. So that's a unique element. It's likely that the wood that was used for that is a local wood, and the local builder put that on there. That's the vernacular element. Does anyone, this is a participation part, does anyone have noticed anything about this building that maybe is out of place? Does anyone?
The garage.
The garage?
The
And
stuff that they just stuck on the front of it?
the second story. Okay. All great answers. It's not, I'll focus on the second story first. It's not a bungalow because it's got a second story. I didn't put the word bungalow on there. It's still a craftsman. It's more of a high style craftsman, which means it's more, I guess, more expensively built. It's got a real focus on the architectural components. So that's one, but the other ones that I liked were the garage. The garage is not an original feature if it's a craftsman house. And you can kind of see, if you look really closely, the stones on the garage are facing. They're not the lava rock, building like the original part of the house.
They are actually lava rock.
Well, are they facing though?
No, they're not. They're full walls.
Oh,
but I
really?
think it was added much later. The garage was added later. Because if you look at the original picture on the site record, the garage isn't there. So.
Well, and it shouldn't be. So
Right, no, I
especially a
totally
two-car
agree.
garage.
I think they added it much
So
later.
that's unique. The other element that I wanted to point out was the enclosed porch. Craftsman houses have porches, covered porches even, but for it to be enclosed is really unique. So those are things that I guess would affect the integrity of the house.
Was that added?
The front porch there that you see that's on the left-hand side, that actually is an open porch. When we bought the house, it was open, and it's a covered porch. My parents closed that, and that's now an office. The funky little addition that's on the front there with the stairs, that's sort of the front is actually the other side. The main entrance is the one where they closed it in. It's now an office. Right by the garage there, that's the side entrance, and my dad closed that in as well. However, it was there. It looked a little bit different at the time, and they had some really crappy cement stairs that were narrow and breaking apart. And I think it's in the original site record photo. I can't remember, but I think that porch on the side is. I know the one on the front is in the original site record. It was listed on the National Register in 1984, or 1983. My parents bought it in 84. And all the elements were still it looked more craftsman-y at the time, but my dad has since kind of covered in some things, enclosed in some things.
Thanks. So those are the things that I noticed. Good house. After we move away from the arts and crafts movement, we start to get into a little bit more modern, simple single-family homes. The first one is this ranch-style house. And this is one of Evelyn's house submissions to me, so thanks, Evelyn, for this one. This is a good example of a ranch style, I think. The purpose of the ranch style, similar to the builder's homes, is that they were designed to function for families, single families. They're almost always single-story, and they have simple but functional elements, like a brick chimney to provide heat for the house, really broad rectangular shape so you're not going upstairs or finding weird rooms to go into. It's just a simple rectangular form. One of the decorative elements on ranch-style houses is the multiple cladding on the wall. You see brick usually in the bottom layer, sometimes stone, and then it moves up to different styles. The key feature for ranch houses, or one of the key features from my perspective, is the large picture window right up in the front. You don't see massive windows like that on house styles before then. You see multiple panes, maybe with different sashes, but the single frame picture window is a new thing. Again, single story. And then another element of the house that you can't really see with this is ranch style houses are the first style to really draw away from entertaining guests in the inside or the front of the house to move entertainment to the back of the house so that families can be in the back. So there's backyards, sometimes there's swimming pools, maybe back patios or porches. Seen in ranch style houses. Has a big backyard. Yeah, so there you go. So thanks, Evelyn.
Does that one have a garage?
It does
isn't the
down the
back.
driveway.
Oh, on
It's
the
not
side?
attached. It's a two-car garage, but it's not attached.
It's not attached, and that's a good thing to note because ranch-style houses also started were the first houses to really start having garages. They had garages attached typically, but they also had detached garages. But because they were built right on the cusp of that period, some of them have them, some of them don't.
What year was that built?
51.
So, I like this house for a couple reasons. I got this picture from Eric Stitt, and I actually sent him an email because I was told, hey, you should get, there's a couple people I was told to email, and he was one of them, to try and get pictures of the house. And he told me, there's nothing cool about my house. You know, no one wants to see it. There's nothing special. And, you know, so I said, okay, well, let me just take a look. And I took a look, and I thought it was perfect. It fit perfectly in my PowerPoint. So he's like, okay, you can use it. But what really makes this a good transition is because we start to transition into very modern style houses where it has elements of design and function, like what we were talking about is the modern era, but they start to pull architectural elements from much older styles, and it really starts to become the mutt theme where they're pulling so many different styles from different pieces that it forms, this unique style in itself. So Eric's is a good example. His is what's called a French-style ranch. And what makes it a French-style ranch is it has the typical ranch elements. It's got a picture window that you can't really see it behind the trees. It's got horizontal siding, which is, again, with the long rectangular footprint of the ranch house. But the number one key feature that makes it French is this massive hipped roof that goes right over top of the entire house. You just don't see hipped roofs cover the entire portion of a house in most architectural styles. English style houses are gabled. French style houses really emphasize that hip, and in this ranch, the hip covers the entire portion of the house. So that's a really unique feature. And the other one is the stone elaborations up the side of the door. You see stone elaborations on ranch-style houses along the base, and you can see it on this one if you look closely. But to have them move up against the side of the door frame is also a French element. A lot of vertical features in French-style elements. And of course, the French love basketball, and there's a basketball court in their front. So we all know this. So thanks, Eric. So then we get to Dave. This is Dave Krolik's house, and this is a great example, I think, a good one to have, because it is the epitome of a postmodern mutt. Postmodern era houses, their focus was pulling architectural elements from older styles in the typical single-family home design function house. And so I wouldn't necessarily give Dave's an architectural style. It really doesn't have one. It's kind of like mine, but it does have elements. So let's talk about those elements. The first thing is the attached garage. So we know it's a more modern, it's a two-car garage, likely built in the 70s, 80s, or 90s. But then we see a gable on hip. Well, that element is a very Dutch element. We see those on Dutch-style houses or Dutch-era houses. That's not unique to current houses. We see the window in the pediment. Now, windows in pediments, they were first started in classical houses, where they had a rounded window at the very top of a pediment to allow light into these really old houses. And then in classical revivals, which is a period where they brought back classical elements, they turned that window from a circle into a square. And so we see that, which is just another element that was brought from way back then. We see really closely, you can see a transom window. I touched on that at the beginning. It could be there, it could not be. I think I see it in there, but who knows. But that's a Georgian element of architecture. And the other one that I see here is the wood-clad chimney. So if you think about a chimney, clad in wood, that's scary. Your chimney's made of wood. Well, you first start seeing that happen in the shed-style houses. And so in this more postmodern house, it pulled that element. So we've got 4 or 5 different components to put together Dave's house. So it's a postmodern mutt. And he made trash day. Good for Dave. So the next house, this is Arlene's house, and I liked Arlene's house. It's very similar to Dave's house in the sense that it's got really modern design and function. It's a little bit larger, and it's got some unique elements pulled from other architectural styles. Like we see again, the gable on the hip roof, the window in the pediment. It's also a square window. It's a little bit smaller. It's hard to see. But this one has some unique features too, like the brackets underneath the eaves. What makes these brackets different from, say, an arts and crafts movement style craftsman house is their decorative brackets. You can see they're cut, they're wavy, they're curved. So decorative brackets really are first seen in Italianate style houses. So we're going to say, for the sake of this, that these brackets, the idea is really pulled from the Italianate style. And to emphasize it more, we see the brackets underneath the windowsill. There's really no need for brackets underneath the windowsill, especially decorative ones. So we can tell that this is strictly a decorative element, pulling it from the architectural Italianate style. And, well, there's a child's head there, too. I don't know why. Thank you, Arlene. So then we get to Marin's house. And Marin's was another good example. One of the things I wanted to mention about modern style houses is from the modern period begins in like 1905. Well, 1905 isn't modern for us, right? But the word still applies for this entire period. And then it goes postmodern. Well, after modern. That doesn't make sense. I don't know. But all the styles, many of the styles that are in this modern period, try and use the contemporary, or they try and use a word that means of the current time. Well, this contemporary style is from 1945 to 1990. It's no longer contemporary style, but it's still called contemporary style architecture. I don't know. So I just thought I'd point that out. I think that's kind of interesting. So what makes Marin's house a contemporary style are 2 things. First of all, we see the large, low-pitched roof. That's pretty standard for the design and function of these modern houses. But the number one feature of Marin's house is this large, uninterrupted wall surface. Contemporary style architecture emphasizes their number one feature is a broad, uninterrupted wall or broad surface. Sometimes they're so distinct that they're separate from the house by 10 feet, set right in the front. It's really bizarre. But for more modern styles that have the contemporary, it's built into the house. That's the main feature. The other features that we see are recessed entrance at the end of a portico. portico is basically just a walkway that has a covering with columns on the other side of it. That's what a portico is. And then another big component of the contemporary style are these two massive front gables. Not seen in every contemporary style, because a lot of contemporary styles have gables on different ends and a lot of flat roofs sometimes, but in this particular contemporary house, it's got two massive front gables. And then the garage in front. So then we start to get to really modern houses. And the really modern houses with really large footprints are called millennium mansions. That's what the architectural style is. And in these millennium mansions, we start to notice a couple very unique things. The first thing we see is, this is Anne's house, by the way. Thanks, Anne. This cascading roofs. And what that means is, look at how many gables.
Which I should mention, we live like a mile apart.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So my neighborhood was built like 15 years before her neighborhood.
Yeah, really?
But we're in the same neighborhood.
Yeah, and that's interesting. But one of the first things you see in this house is all the cascading gable roofs. You see 1, 2, 3, there's 6 gables on this roof. And then as you move further, there's a random side gable that comes out the side. So that's a really millennium mansion style feature.
Is this Anne's roof?
And Russell.
Russell,
Okay.
in Russell's house, yeah. So the complex roofs and hips and gables, that's a big feature of millennium mansion style houses. Again, in the postmodern architecture of the time, these millennium mansions pull many features from old styles. And one of the things that they do is they focus a lot on windows, because windows are really interesting. And so if you can put a lot of different types of window components in your house, it's great. This one has 3 different types of windows that all represent 3 different styles. The front one, we have the big picture window at the very front, kind of like a ranch style house. We have up at the very top the semicircled arch window with the square underneath. That comes from the mansard style houses. And then the very horizontal, the vertical windows right next to the doors, those are French style window elements. But the number one thing about millennium mansions that makes them what they are is the 3-car garage. So, yeah, you see that in 1985, 1990, but really 2000 era houses. 3-car garage is the number one.
You gotta find one that has the big, like, tall garage for the boats and RV.
Yeah,
I see those and I'm like, oh my gosh, you definitely have way too much money. Seriously.
But that would be a millennium mansion
Oh,
style.
yeah. Well, after Millennium Mansion, there's the McMansions, right?
Right, well, mixed mansions are similar. They're really kind of the same name. That's more of a derogatory term for
Yes,
mansions.
I like to use those sort of terms when someone has an entire garage just for their RV.
The next house we come to as we, again, continue to more modern times is our most recently built house, and that's the styled millennium mansion houses. And the focus of these houses, besides having the millennium mansion feel with the multiple gables and multiple roofs and the 3-car garage, is they pull styled elements of a particular style. In this one, this is Evelyn's, another house commissioned by Evelyn. This particular one has elements of the Mediterranean style. And what makes it Mediterranean, what makes it a millennium mansion is the 3-car garage, as I said. And then what makes it Mediterranean are the hipped tiled roofs. That's one distinct feature that you can notice from a mile away. Another feature you see are the really tall entries with the arches. Tall entries are millennium mansion, and the semi-arch or arch is the Mediterranean element. And then we also see stucco siding, which is another Mediterranean element to the house. And then large bay windows are also seen. Massive windows on these millennium mansion style houses. And then if we look close, we see a cat. Petunia? Matilda. There you go. So thanks, Evelyn.
She's a feature of the house.
Feature of it. And then we come to some houses. This is a cabin that was provided by Michael Pressler that I just have no idea what to call this house.
Bungalow.
The reason I have no idea is because it's got so many different things going on. We have horizontal paneling on this side of the house, vertical paneling on this side of the house. We have a Tudor-style door. Where did that come from? I'll tell you what. This tree has a face carved in it. If you look closely, you can barely see it. Is it floating? All of the concrete or the cement blocks that are supposed to support the house aren't connected to the house. Only the four corners are. So I thought that was interesting. And if you look closely, you can see Michael's backside here in this picture. And on this side, you can see Michael's dog staring at Michael's backside. But really, every building, even this cabin, has a little bit of architectural elements. So I would probably call this one closer to a ranch style, a new ranch or a neo ranch, where it is a new building that pulls elements from the ranch style. So that's it. Those are the pictures that I had time to include. Why does all of this matter? This matters because we want to continue to market architectural history as a service industry of our cultural resources. And I wanted to give you guys a sense of what I do when I look at buildings, what I look for, features that I do, so that if someone says, I've got an old library that I'm going to be doing a modification to it, is it important? Does the library have any significant components? You can know that I could look at a picture of the library and be able to say, yes, be careful here, be careful here, be careful here. So I can evaluate the property for its historical significance, and then if it's historically significant, I can help people determine what impacts are going to happen to that and whether they're significant impacts or not significant impacts based off of the architectural components of that building and the historical side of it. So what do you tell your clients? You basically just tell them we're a service cultural resources department who has an architectural historian. We can evaluate your properties for their historical significance, and we can also help determine what your project impacts are going to be for that building and provide you with solutions for the best way to get around those impacts. So thank you all for submitting your pictures. I definitely apologize if I didn't have yours included, but I really appreciate every picture was great. So thank you very, very much. Do we have any questions?
Who's the agency that actually requires, certain developers? Because most of our developers, my experience is just brand new development, but in your work actually relies on people that are developing places that they already have some historical value, right? Let's say if you want to build, if one of our clients wants to build something in Nevada City, right? Nevada City has certain stipulations of how, if they're going to remodel something, right? They have to take care of that. Is that the element that we're selling or we're providing to our clients?
That's one element. So we follow the same cultural resources requirements with Section 106 on the national level and the CEQA requirements for CEQA on the state or city-state level. And so it depends on who's paying for your project. There are unique requirements for particular cities and particular counties where they have local ordinances that basically, help to focus the efforts of 106 and CEQA. But those are the basic processes. So a lot of our clients that would have a historic property that they're doing impacts to would be cities or counties. In some senses, let's say if a city owns the city of Redlands, it is a good example. I got a call from the city of Redlands, and they have a historic library that they're going to be adding an HVAC system to. Well, the library is already listed on the National Register, so it has historical significance. What they need to determine to complete their CEQA compliance is if their project is going to have an impact to that building. So what I would do is I could go look at the building, look at and note the architectural elements of that building and all the historical side of it, and help them determine if removing this door or changing the paneling on this part of the building is going to have a significant impact or not. And then ultimately we help them follow the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation or preservation, which are just national, federal standards for how to do types of rehabilitations on historic properties.
Got it.
I have a question. By significant
So a change that's gonna modify what makes that building important, historically important. So back to the example of the library may be historically important based off of its association with a person and not its association with the architectural elements. And so there's a lot more freedom in what the county or city can change on that library, because what makes that building important isn't its architectural components. But most of the time, it has architectural elements or other historical associations related specifically with certain components of that building that make it historically significant or important. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Address the landscape design or around the building and or landscape features. So like if somebody was to do a project right next to a building, then that would maybe impact the...
Yeah, absolutely. It really depends on the style. So going back to, let's say, the ranch style, where the backyard component of that architectural style is somewhat of a significant feature of that building. So if, let's say, a developer was going to wipe out, they weren't going to touch the ranch building, but they're going to wipe out the whole original patio in the backyard of it, well, that's a component of that building that needs to be considered. And you also have to consider the visual impacts on buildings. So if a skyscraper is going in next to, you know, a very Queen Anne historic building that is in a setting designed for Queen Anne's houses, or, you know, where it was originally, that skyscraper is totally going to throw off the historical, you know, aspects of that Queen Anne building. So we have to consider the effects moving forward with building that skyscraper on that Queen Anne. So yeah, landscape and setting definitely makes a significance. Anybody else?
Really interesting.
Good. Yeah. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Right, now we need a bow from you.
A bow.